So one part of my project was looking into the types of relationships between organisms. In this, I found that there are three types. There's mutualisms, which is where both species are benefiting. There's commensalism, where one is benefiting and the other is neutral, neither feeling negative or positive effects. And then there's parasitism. Parasitism is characterized by one benefiting at the expense of their counterpart, relying on their counterpart for food, water, heat, and habitat without replenishing what they take. After looking at a parasitic relationship, it made me realize how parasitic our human relationship is with the environment. So I realized how much our current agricultural system contributes to this negative relationship. And so my thesis was, how can natural relationships and cycles inform the way humans interact with soil, water, and nutrients in agriculture? There were three main takeaways that I had from this project, and I'm going to set them as learning objectives for what you guys should take away from my presentation. Current agriculture's effects on soil health and inefficient use of water and land, and then current agriculture's contribution to greenhouse emissions, and then how changing our agricultural system can make more of a positive relationship with these three things. In the 1930s, our president FDR was already paying attention to the importance of an agricultural system. This was in something he said in a letter that he wrote to the senators, the state senators around our country, emphasizing how important it is to set up a healthy agricultural system and how important it is to emphasize soil health. Unfortunately, looking at our system today, it seems like they may not have been successful in setting that system up. Ideally, the nutrient cycle involves all 7 organism kingdoms that are on Earth. Plants get their nutrients from the soil, and those plants feed the animals and the humans. Then the humans and animals and plants create waste that goes back into the soil, where microbes such as bacteria, fungi, protists, and archaea process that waste and turn it back into nutrients that plants can use. So we have disrupted this cycle. A lot of waste coming from plants, animals, and humans is ending up in landfills and not staying within the balanced system. There were 4 main changes that have happened most in the last century that have made this negative impact. In the last century, there was a huge growth in human population, so scientists were pressured to find ways to make our food production keep up with that growth in population. So we started over-applying monocultures, we started manipulating genetics, and technological advancements came around, and then we started applying a lot more synthetic chemicals and nutrients. This did greatly increase what one farmer can do. One farmer can feed a lot more people nowadays than they could in the 1910s, but the question is, at what cost? And that's what I looked into. So the first really scary aspect of agriculture that stood out to me is our current rate of desertification. Desertification is the process of land becoming barren or nutrient deplete and unable to grow plants. Desertification comes mostly from soil erosion and overgrazing. And so with the heavier use of animal monocultures and monocrops, we've seen the rates of desertification rise greatly. At our current rate of desertification, in just over 100 years, there will be no more farmable land. So not only are monocrops contributing to desertification, there are also 3 other impacts that they're having that I want to talk about. First of all, they're causing a loss of biodiversity. In the last century, we compared seedless varieties from 1903 to seedless varieties from the 1990s and found that 90% of the seed varieties that we had then have gone extinct. And this is because our diets have become much more narrow. 15 staple crops feed 90% of the world's, make up for 90% of the world's diet. And so we've really narrowed down what we're eating, and it's led to a lot of loss in plant biodiversity. As well, pesticide use has become a lot more common with monocrops because they're a lot more vulnerable to insects and diseases. Pesticides have started to be heavily applied. A monocrop is more vulnerable because it's all one species, so one type of insect or one disease can take out the whole crop, and so we've had to apply these pesticides. Now the problem is that these pesticides aren't only toxic to those insects and to those diseases, they are also having effects on other life. I looked into the effects they have on human health, and they're correlated with leukemia, with neurological defects and birth defects. And so if they're having those effects on humans, I have no doubt that they're having similar, if not worse, effects on the surrounding environment. The last effect I wanted to talk about monocrops having is the application of synthetic fertilizers. These synthetic fertilizers are our method of providing nutrients to these crops. And with the application of these fertilizers, they get taken away from the farm in runoff, and they get into aquatic ecosystems, where then that excess nitrogen and phosphorus is what the algae in those ecosystems uses as nutrients. So there's a massive growth in algae population in those ecosystems, and so the algae overpopulates, which takes the oxygen out of the marine ecosystem and makes it hard, if not impossible, for other marine life to survive in that area. And so this has led to large dead zones in our oceans, rivers, and lakes. Now, the emissions from our agricultural system. First, I'd like to talk about the transportation of food. The average distance that it takes for food to get to your plate is 1,500 miles. And that is because we have started using these monocrops, which produce a large amount of one type of food, and then this food has to be distributed. And so we need to start using more local methods. Additionally, I looked at methane and the contribution that agriculture has to methane emissions. Now, methane's a really scary greenhouse gas because it has 21 times the heating potential of carbon dioxide. And so it will likely be have the greatest effect on global warming. And 50% of methane emissions come from agriculture, mostly from cow, livestock, cow feedlots, and rice monocultures. In the warm waterlogged soil, in rice crops, and in the hindgut in a cow's digestive system, ideal conditions for methanogenesis are provided. Methanogenesis is the formation of methane. And from rice and cow livestock, 200 million tons of methane are produced annually. The last problem that I identified with our agriculture is its use of land and water. So not only are we polluting water and decertifying land, we are also not using these two resources efficiently. Crops are often overwatered, and then that water just drains out and ends up being wasted as well. Land use, we don't use methods that efficiently maximize the amount of crops we're producing in our land, and currently 40% of the Earth's surface is used for agriculture, and 70% of Earth's freshwater resources go to agriculture. With our population expected to reach 10 billion by the year 2050, we need to start using these resources more efficiently, because not only will we need to provide more water and land for those people, we'll also need to provide more water and land for the agriculture that we'll need in order to feed those people. So now I'm going to talk to you about solutions. So space and water efficient solutions. There were two methods that I identified: soilless growing and biointensive methods. Now, soilless growing is the process of running nutrient-rich water through plant roots, and then the plants extract their nutrients from that water. Therefore, they don't rely on soil space to grow plants. This system is also very water efficient because the same water is cycled through multiple times. Aquaponics use 10% of the amount of water that conventional agriculture uses to produce the same amount of crops, and hydroponics reduces water usage similarly. Now the second solution that I mentioned is biointensive growing. Biointensive growing focuses mainly on soil health. So they focus on using fertilizers that feed the soil ecosystem, and then the soil ecosystem in turn feeds the plants. With a healthy soil ecosystem, you can grow a lot more plants in less area because they have better access to nutrients because there's a healthier nutrient cycle in the system. Not only that, but because it's a healthier soil ecosystem, the usage of water in it is more efficient. So bio-intensive crops that have been applied in South America perform a lot better under drought conditions. And this to me means that when there's less water, they can still perform similarly to how they usually do, and at least a lot better than the conventional methods would in drought. In South America, they also reported that they are 50 to 75% more land efficient, so they produce the same amount of crops in 25 to 50% the amount of land. So these biointensive and soilless growing methods will also help us decrease emissions. They will localize the food market because right now you need to be able to invest in a large amount of land in order to get into the agricultural business. This is lead to the agricultural system being dominated by corporations. But with these systems that are space efficient and water efficient, you wouldn't need as much space or water to grow still a lot of crops. And so this will lead to more local food sources and less food transportation. As you can see in Durango, we already sort of have better access than most places to this local food production, and we need to just start spreading this access to the rest of the world. As well, we need to look at how we can decrease these methane emissions that I talked about. Cows that are produced in feedlots, there's really no way to run a feedlot sustainably, so we do need to start just spreading out the cows that we have and making sure that we're integrating plant life and livestock in a balanced way, so then the cow's diet returns to a more diverse grazing diet instead of the ryegrasses that we feed them now, which increases the fiber in their diet, and with higher fiber diet, the methane they produce goes up. And so if we return to their normal diets, that will help. Additionally, I found that there are supplements you can put in a cow's diet that reduce their methane emissions by up to 30%. The main one that I came across was called 3-nitropropanol, and when added to the diet, it does cut the emissions by 30%. So, and then rice cultures, which contribute hugely to methane emissions, they have started implementing ways of draining the warm waterlogged soil halfway through the season, the rice season, and with that they cut the methane emissions down by half. And so there are super simple solutions that involve just natural processes that can help fix this, fix our emissions and balance out our systems. And so we need to start facilitating the life that helps balance out these emissions, so the life that removes carbon and methane from our atmosphere. Life such as forests, so integrating forestry and agriculture, putting more trees on our farms can reduce the carbon coming from those farms and the carbon being produced from the transportation, as well as another very interesting organism that I came across was called a methanotroph. Methanotroph, that on the right is a picture of it. It's a type of bacteria that source of nutrient is methane, and then its output is oxygen. So it literally lives off methane and then creates oxygen. And so with these, we could start applying them more in our atmosphere and around farms to reduce the amount of methane we're producing. Another thing that I looked into was how we can return the aquatic ecosystems that we've put into imbalance, return them to their normal function. And so we have a lot of algae in some areas, and that's leading to those dead zones. And so what can we do with that algae is what I asked. And I found that with that algae, because it's coming from fertilizers, it's super high in nitrogen and phosphorus, and so it actually can be directly applied as a type of fertilizer. As well, we can turn that algae into biodiesel. You can convert algae into a way to drive cars, into a type of gas that you can run cars on. And so I found that interesting, and we need to start facilitating these natural processes, and making sure that when we have something that we're producing in a large amount, that we're making sure that we have the other side of that ecosystem, or the counterbalance to that, that's taking the chemicals and nutrients that are being off-put by that, and cycling it through on the other side as well. So from this project, I learned that everything on Earth has its place. Nothing that we have, none of the methane, none of the carbon that's in our atmosphere came from some alien world. It's just that human activity has caused it to be removed from where it belongs. And so we need to make sure that we're facilitating the natural processes that put it back. This won't be an easy change, and the effects of it, the positive effects it'll have, won't be seen overnight. But if you're interested in life on Earth as we know it continuing, then these are things we have to do. And I hope that you guys can reflect on a few ways you could contribute to making this change. Maybe it's just by being a conscious consumer and buying from places that you know use these sustainable methods, as well as just reducing your use of water, and your contribution to the emissions that are coming from human activity. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Great. Thank you, Berr. So we are going to open it up to questions both from our panel and audience members. Feel free to ask questions as well. So this sounds great, and it sounds like you've identified a lot of really sort of good, useful solutions. I was really interested in the sort of like chemical one with the methane. What was it called? Methane. Yeah, that was really interesting. What are the barriers to putting these in? Like, why are we not already doing this? If this is so like proven and it's kind of out there, and you found all this, and like, why are we not doing this already?
Well, so we are already doing this. If you compare the emissions coming from U.S. agriculture to countries that are using the older, more conventional system, we only 9% of our total emissions come from agriculture. So we've greatly reduced the impact we're having. But in other countries where there's a lot higher population, conventional methods do provide the fastest and easiest way to grow, like to mass produce food. So we are still seeing those applied, but in the long run, this will be effective. It only produces 25% less food on average than the conventional methods, and we waste 50% of our food anyway. So if we can just find systems that don't waste as much, then we can produce the food that we need.
Was that a specific answer to the methanotrophes?
No.
Do we, as the United States, have we introduced?
Not methanotrophes, no, but we've started implementing just more of these
Gotcha.
Sustainable methods in general.
Gotcha, okay.
How widely used are the methanotrophes?
So they're kind of just right now being developed by scientists, and they are naturally occurring bacteria, so they're already in our ecosystems, they're in soil, they're in the water, but we're just looking at ways we can apply them in heavier amounts and like to balance out what we've done.
So it's a pretty new like technology.
Yeah,
still.
yeah. Mitchell?
Do you think that there could be a problem if we started mass producing food using the water flowing through the roots? Do you think we could run into a problem of the roots rotting? Is there a danger of that?
Well, there are types of plants that soilless methods don't necessarily work very well for, but most plants, it doesn't affect their root health.
Okay.
Libby?
Can you share what you found about how economics plays a role in all this? Like, you know, at the end, I heard you pitch for buy locally sourced food, which is a great idea, but
But it's more
oftentimes that's
expensive.
way more expensive.
Yeah.
So there's both like the personal level of like, am I gonna shell out more for James Ranch beef if I eat beef? And then there's also, you know, what did you find in terms of sort of the economics of it on a larger scale?
So I didn't look specifically into cost differences. I looked into production differences, which is very tied in with cost differences. And we do produce 25% less food when we implement these systems. So the cost will go up, but if we subsidize, instead of subsidizing corn and subsidizing the corporatized agricultural systems, and we subsidize those small local farms, then we could see the price reach equilibrium, or maybe not quite, because it will always be a little cheaper to produce the conventional methods, but we could see it become more affordable if we start using our subsidies more.
And what do you think is what are some of the obstacles to subsidizing small family farms?
It's hard to distribute an even amount when there's a lot of smaller companies. I would think that it'd just be a lot harder to spread the money out, whereas when there's just a few corporations running it, you just hand out 50 million and 50 million to two different people, and it's a lot easier. But I think it's reasonable. It's not an impossible task. We could do it. Not yet, we should.
Berr, how has your research question evolved? Because I'm noticing like some pretty distinct differences in your talk and your thesis, and like, can you just walk us through sort of the evolution of your research question and your focus over the course of this project?
It's stayed pretty similar. I originally chose a thesis question that just talked about making agriculture more sustainable in general. Then I focused it more on soil health and the nutrient cycle, as well as water efficiency. And that was because it was maybe a little bit of a smaller task. It was still such a huge topic, and I didn't really get to dive in as much as I could. You could learn about this for a lifetime. But I did try and hone in on those three things because they seem like kind of the most important aspects to our agricultural system.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Berr. If you would step outside for a moment, I will deliberate with the panel. I'll call you back in a second.